Dr. Malmgren, thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to talk to you about what you think are the two top geopolitical challenges facing the Trump administration right now. What do you think are the two top things that are on President Trump's plate moving forward?
Well, I think the two biggest ones are how to reformulate the U.S.-China relationship and make it less antagonistic and be in a framework of, there'll be problems, but we'll manage them in an orderly way. And I think Chinese will buy into that. We haven't had that with China. The only time it was slightly there was when Kissinger opened up China under Nixon. And that's a long story how that happened. Sometime I'll have to talk to the world about it. But
do you not feel that, especially over the last 8 years, with what's happened in the South China Sea and the building of these islands and such, that the U.S. has, to a certain extent, been pushed around by China?
The Chinese military have been probing, and for them, Obama's passivity was marvelous. I mean, the senior admiral in the PLA Navy, I think he's now the chief, said publicly some months ago that we knew Obama could see with the satellite that we had started doing something. And every week I was waiting for the U.S. to react. And so we put earth-moving equipment and waited. And then we started putting up buildings and waited. And then we said, well, what the heck, let's try for an airport, an airstrip. And that got completed. And he said, we were really surprised, but we welcomed the opportunity to build out at that level because we had already announced the ADIZ. We didn't enforce it yet, but we positioned things. And this was just a period of, for us, great opportunity that couldn't be ignored. And also they said we've now started building up our own Marine Corps. And one of the key launch pads for all of this is Djibouti, right next to the American base. So, another president probably would not have let that happen. So he said this, I mean, these were mistakes, but they have been pushing. But they were pushing, expecting that somewhere there'd be pushback, and then that would be a boundary. It's like, young children and up to through teenagers, where are the fences? And until you see a fence, well, you just keep pushing out and then seeing how much toleration you're going to get out of your mother and father. There always have to be boundaries. And so they felt there was a period of opportunity. Putin's more aware of the boundaries question because he's not only got the U.S., but he's got the Europeans who often do a lot of the pushing back quietly rather than in public.
So Putin and Russia, you think, are probably the second geopolitical issue facing the Trump administration?
I think not because it's a threat to America, but because it's a threat to a good part of the world, including the Middle East and Europe. I mean, he's going to try to be very active in the Middle East. I mean, he's clearly now trying to strengthen his foothold in Libya and use that as another piece of a kind of arc of defense. He would have preferred to have a stronger position in Egypt, but I think Trump is now going to persuade General Sisi to turn back to the U.S. But Sisi was pretty much outlawed by Obama. So because too much of the world, it's not a small part of the world, it's a whole bunch of interrelated areas. Now, what happens in Turkey is going to be important, but it's slightly less scale. And Turkey is obviously setting out on, Erdogan anyway, setting out on a mission to restore the days when the Turks were everywhere and had preeminence. And one way or another, there has to be a reckoning with that. Because it's going to spill into the Saudi Shia issues and the whole Muslim world. So, because Erdogan is a practical person, he's going to use Islamic themes to manipulate events. So that comes near to that, but in essence, it's related with Putin. That is, if Russia were not tolerant of this or finding it useful that Erdogan is messing around with us, then it would be a different picture. Now, the North Korean thing, that's a one-off thing. I'm not sure how the U.S. is going to handle that. But when Trump says he will do it alone if China won't help, that's scary. China doesn't help a lot because it's convenient for China to have us tied up, a large part of our military system tied up with a different problem. It thins out our forces in relation to China. So it's understandable why they wouldn't bother with it, because it's convenient. So would they crack down? If they thought it was going to create risk of some kind of accident between China and the U.S. directly, then I think they'll. But and that's conceivable. So, but that's kind of a next level down from the first two that you asked.
You worked for 4 U.S. presidents.
Yeah.
Given what you know about how they delegate, how they make decisions, and given what you know about today's White House, do you feel that given all these geopolitical challenges that we've just talked about, do you think that this Trump administration today is ready to handle any of the geopolitical challenges we've just talked about?
No, I think they may be in the future, but they haven't staffed it out yet. I think General McMaster is brilliant, but he is also a kind of intellectual, professorial type of person.
National Security Advisor.
Yeah,
right?
he replaced General Flynn, but he's great. He's a strategist, but in my experience, you need more than that. You have to have somebody who's, somebody who executes the concept, gets the job done. And that is, it was a kind of hands-on process. Kissinger did both. He dreamed up his strategy, and then he basically monitored everybody and punished anybody out of line. He was ruthless in using intelligence to winkle out any resistance. So I don't think McMaster is that kind of person. So he needs a team there in that Dina Powell is one of the deputies, and she is up till now totally underestimated in Washington. Who is she? She was in George W. Bush's administration. Pippa, my daughter, knows her well. But her reputation in Goldman was she was the best damage control person in America. She, even Warren Buffett was asked one time, if you had a problem, something you owned and was spilled into the river and the toxic waste and all that, who would you call? He said, Dina Powell. So that tells me there's somebody there who's capable of taking on a mess and putting order into it. So, but I think she's underestimated. We'll see how she does, but that's her reputation. But beyond that, they are assembling a team.
So do you think if a crisis hit tomorrow, the White House is actually prepared to deal with it?
They don't have, when you have to address a fire and the fire department isn't fully staffed, it's not easy. It's not going to go well. It's just so many things that have to be decided so fast. And the pace of decisions now is way faster than it was 10 years ago. It's, we have people deployed who are close to events, who need instructions within seconds. And so you've got to have people at the other end to give those instructions. They have to kind of really fit it to, it takes an operation. It's a lot of people. So, and if the president delegated this to the Pentagon, but you always have to keep some kind of an eye on it from the White House point of view. So they're not ready for it, no.
Okay, final question for you. Given the geopolitical challenges that we've just talked about, and given your economic expertise, you were an economic advisor, as I say, to 4 presidents, No one knows the economy better than you do. And given what's happened with central banks, and for lack of a better word, the experiment, this grand experiment that's happened here over the last decade or so.
It's an experiment that went badly.
How do you see these issues combining, geopolitics and economics, over the next few years, and where are we going with that?
We're likely to have a period of disappointment because the momentum that Trump was seen to bring to Washington isn't going to hold. He may be able to do some of the things he set out to do, but it's going to take time. So there's going to be disappointment. And I like to refer to it as it's going to be, everything he's going to do is going to turn out to be later and less. And that will cause a market correction. How does that go? I mean, it could be pretty sweeping because Europe and Asia are lifted primarily by the U.S. enthusiasm. I mean, when the IMF and other organizations raise their forecast, it's because they see this, things are changed, better times are coming, but there's no evidence of that yet. And the key thing is world trade has now been in a slump, essentially near stagnation, for the longest period since the Great Depression. This didn't start yesterday. This is now really flattened out. It's a consequence of the great financial crisis. And in a world in which, if you step back from it all and just have a simple thought, how did most of the countries grow since the Second World War? And the answer is most countries, including Germany, didn't have adequate domestic income to base growth on domestic demand. So basically they chose to get on an express train called export, and then you become reliant on external demand. And the US for a long time was the engine, and then it began to be China and others. But now world trade is stagnant. There is no engine. If the US wobbles, everybody wobbles, because too many are dependent on what happens outside their economies. Even Germany is still the most export-dependent country of all the countries. It's almost 50% of the GDP is exports. And I think that's going to really come down because China will now be exporting in competition with Germany power plants and turbines, and they're going to do infrastructure. That's what the One Belt, One Road is all about. And so they're going to be Germany's competitor, and they'll be able to be cheaper, and they can offer better financial terms. If the Germans offer 25 years, they'll say 50, and if the Germans say 50, they'll offer 100.
So in the short term, you're pretty pessimistic?
Yeah, I am. But if I look a little further out, and I say to myself, if the whole world is in trouble, what happens at that point? And the answer is a lot of money is going to come to the U.S. because it'll be the least troubled place, and it will look like the safest place with the biggest capital market. So we have it's not the end of the world for the U.S. It's going to be harsh on everybody else, but I think we get a bounce after we have a downturn. So I don't look at it as the end of the world at all. I just think it's going to be turbulent, but when push comes to shove, a lot of money will come to the U.S. And that may relieve some of this problem we have with this overload of debt and inadequate financing.
Become a Risk Hedge Insider for free by visiting riskhedge.com. Each week you'll receive vital analysis on today's geopolitical, financial, and social risks. Just visit riskhedge.com today to become a Risk Hedge Insider.